I
Save
hear
it for the podcast.
No,
Save
no,
it for the
okay, yeah, but I'm
podcast.
just trying to level set. So
You tried to do the same thing I was trying to do.
all
You
right, all
said
right,
save
all
it for
right,
the
right.
podcast. So
Okay,
save it for
no
the
disclaimers, no preliminaries. Okay, I'll go ahead and start recording, and I'm already recording, but we'll do the.
Okay.
I need that thing from the
Okay.
Do you
filmmaking.
need me?
All right, here we are. It's proglangcast, episode 5. I think it's episode 5. And we have a special guest today. We're privileged to have. And rather than mangle his name pronunciation, I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and provide whatever level of biography feels that he wants to give. I am Christopher Augustus. The other host finally has a chance to introduce himself. So why don't you do that? Who are you?
I'm Steve Thames. Christopher and I have been working together off and on for the better part of a couple decades now. So just came up with this idea of doing this together and introducing
Adám Brudzewsky, or
Okay.
something like that. Anything
So-
goes really. I can't even say my family name properly. It's Polish, and I'm not. So.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm a lifelong APLer. I think that's how people describe me. My father was a great APLer who was with things from the beginning. He started working at IBM, I think in '68, and so he was there when it all started. And when Iverson started with APL, and it started off as an internal thing at IBM, then it became a public thing. And he was a friend of Iverson. I actually sat on Iverson's lap as a baby. Because when Iverson would come to Denmark, he would visit us at home. So
You sat on his lap?
No,
yes, I did. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Oh, I thought you were
I
saying
sat
your
on
father.
Iverson's lap as a
Oh,
no.
okay.
My father didn't sit on Iverson's lap. My father was no, my father was younger than Iverson, but not much. But and his Iverson's sons, they remember me as well as a kid. So I grew up in that whole culture. My father was an APL consultant, worked from home, and he would entertain me at the computer, and he showed me this thing. And for me, it was just a game. I didn't understand what was going on when we went to APL conferences. So I was at my first APL conference when I was 1 year old.
Wow.
And I've only been told this. I don't remember it, of course, myself, but I was supposed to demonstrate some user interface that was supposedly easy enough that a toddler could use it. But the conference wasn't really geared for babies, although there were a couple there. And somebody offered my parents to get the baby some orange juice, and it turned out to be a screwdriver instead. So I got drunk and missed my presentation at age 1.
Wow.
And but nevertheless, I grew up with all of this, and my father would make little games for me in APL that would print circles and smiley faces and various shapes to the screen and play noises um, and he would also do character-based transformations and show me how to do that, so I could take little stick people made of slashes and circles and things and turn them upside down using APL primitives and trains that would drive across the screen made of APL characters, and it was all just fun and for me, and it was just a way to speak to the computer to tell it how to do things in an intuitive way that was easy enough for a little kid to understand. And later on, as my early teens, I started really sitting down at the computer and just experimenting. You just leave me at the computer, just have fun. You can't break anything. And eventually, I started writing programs to actually do things, keeping track of stuff and computing various things. And eventually, I also used it later when I went to a school that had people donating money to the school, but it was a whole mess of the databases, lists, Excel files, whatever, that they had, and I to clean up the messy data, I used APL as a tool. And I later worked for an actual fundraiser as well. And again, same kind of problem, lots of different data that needed cleaning up, and I used APL a little bit there as well. Not as a daily thing, but just for the one-time cleaning up. And then I I briefly got in touch with Dialog Limited, and then I went on off to do other things. I was a bit stressed out. My father died at the time. I just had my first child that moved, so I couldn't keep that up. But a few years later, they contacted me again, and Gitte and Morten, they were the CEO and CTO at the time. They came to visit me in Montreal, where they were visiting one of the people working at Dialog. Anyway, and then they basically offered me to come work, and for them they needed an APLer, and they knew, I mean, we knew each other from when I was little, and they knew that my father had taught me APL, and I would be able to pick up, even though it wasn't exact same flavor of APL, but I would be able to pick this up fairly easily. They needed an expert APLer rather than spending years training one. They could just take me if I was willing. And so I started working for them part time, next to my normal job at the fundraisers. And then as the fundraiser was winding down, he was getting older, then I started working more for them. And eventually, they asked if I could move to England and work at the Dialog headquarters full time, and that's what I did then. And since then, I've been
Is that
working
what you're doing now? Are you still?
starting. I don't live there anymore. I moved. Dialog is an interesting company. It's kind of like a two companies together, a Danish one and an English one. They work as one unit, but that means we have two offices, one in Denmark, one in England. So I worked at the English one for 5 years, and I moved. What is it? 2 years ago, moved to Denmark and working at the Danish office as well.
How does the family, like Denmark compared to England?
I would like Denmark way better than England. I mean, I'm from Denmark originally,
Oh,
and so and we lived in London, and it's big and busy and
Yeah.
whatever. And it's Denmark is very different, and especially where we live. We live in a medium-sized town, and we live right at the edge next to the forest. And the children go by bicycle to school every day through the forest. And in London, we wouldn't even let them go out of the door by themselves. And never mind riding a bicycle. That's suicidal.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's nice, and it's close to the office here as well. In London, I had rather far to the office, and here I can be by the office in a quarter of an hour by bicycle. So
Do
that's
you
nice.
do you go into work every day, or are you starting to do work remotely now from home as well?
After coronavirus, then Dialog made a general rule of thumb that you should be in the office for 3 days a week. You can choose which days. Most people uh, work from home Monday and Friday, and then in the middle of the week they work at the office. But the whole company is super flexible about pretty much everything, and especially at the Danish office, we're very few people there, and people go places and do things. So I can work from home when I need to, and I can work at the office when I need to.
Really?
It's nice to be at the office, be quiet, and like dedicated to work, and then go home.
Do you find
Often I
yourself
go home to take meetings. Yeah.
do you find yourself talking to people a lot in the work that you do? I mean, is there a lot of discussion and collaboration, or are you just kind of at a desk?
Meaning internal or out external?
No,
Or
when
you asking about
when you
what?
go into the office, I'm curious about like the remote. Is it
Oh,
really
um,
necessary?
I think I spoke more with people at the office when I was in England, but it's not exactly the same kind of crowd. Most of the people in England, they are C programmers. So Dialog APL is implemented
Right.
mostly in C. And there I had some technical discussions. Something is not working. I would speak with those C programmers that whose responsibility it is that whatever it is that's not working. There's also some administration people and so on. In Denmark, we have uh, some APLers, and we have some of the admins done in Denmark. So and there's less of a reason for me to speak with people. But we always have some communication tool. We used to use Pigeon originally, and
Pigeon,
then switch to Zoom, and then yeah, yeah. Uh,
like a
and
carrier pigeon.
then no, it's an application called
Yeah.
Pigeons.
I don't know it. Do you know it, Steve? Pigeon?
I've heard of it, but I don't
Oh,
know it.
okay.
No, I've never used it, but I did know when he said pigeon that he was a tool. Um,
Yeah,
but I
whatever.
haven't
It's
seen
one
it
of those
myself.
standard protocols for chat that we
Oh,
used
okay.
to use, and then we used it was called APLer at the time for video calls. Once coronavirus hit, and or for remote meetings, then Zoom became a big thing,
Uh,
and then we
Zoom
switched
took over
everything
the
to
world.
Zoom. Yeah,
Became a dictionary
and then
word, like Xerox or
yeah,
Kleenex.
yeah. But we found in the company that either entirely virtual meetings or entirely in-person meetings are good. Hybrid meetings really don't work well,
Oh,
meaning
interesting.
where
Half and
half of the
half.
people are sitting
Yeah.
in a meeting room and then some kind of system to connect them with people on a video call. We paid enormous amount of money to companies to make our meeting room work for this kind of hybrid thing, and they never did. Table microphones, ceiling microphones, giant screen with camera that auto
Yeah.
tracks people and whatever. Nothing works. It just isn't the same
When you
thing.
say nothing works, are you talking technologically, or it just didn't work in terms of getting what you wanted out of the meeting?
Y- I mean, the goal of the technology is to make the meeting work the way you want it to. Right? And so if the
Right.
even if the technology is working to spec,
Yeah.
right, but it's not actually providing the service you want, because
Most technology.
whatever reason, right? That's people sitting in a room together. They speak to each other in a different way, and it's not suitable. Right? They will turn to each other in the room, which necessarily must be away from some camera, wherever you put the camera. The microphones can't be right in everybody's faces, and even if they are sitting with each their own microphone, they will pick out everybody else's voices, and it just didn't work well. Um,
Mm.
So let me
so
ask.
and yeah, so now we're always sitting with some communication tool. We just recently switched to Microsoft Teams,
James.
and we contact each other by chat or video call instantly when there is something. So I think we
Yeah.
work very well together, and we always, even before coronavirus, we always had about half or a third of the employees working remotely from wherever they live around the world. So we're used to that.
I think it's very interesting that you labeled yourself an APLer. Uh, I think that a lot of programmers will identify themselves as, I'm a C programmer, I'm a Java programmer, I'm this programmer, I'm that programmer. I try not to do it because, uh, yeah, I prefer not to think of myself as like you code in these languages. But you actually said APLer, and not even APL programmer, but APLer. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. But also, when I've listened to you on the ArrayCast, you talk about other languages that you've worked in, JavaScript. You obviously know the other array languages, J, you know BQN. I mean, when there's discussions comparing the languages, you seem to understand them well enough to be able to talk about, the differences in the capabilities and the various strengths and weaknesses of all these other languages, K and the other languages. So are you do you not think of yourself as polyglottal like Abel, or is it just that you focus on APL to the exclusion of
No, I
all
don't think
else?
of myself that way, and I think that's because of how I mean, I speculate at least. It's how I learned APL. So I didn't sit down and study a programming language. I didn't go to a school and learn programming over there. For me, it was something that was always there. I was being shown since I was a child, and I just grew up with it and increased my experience, increased my vocabulary. It got corrected when I did something wrong, either by the computer spitting out errors or by my father. Um, and I read books and would increase the level of books. And if you go through what I just said without the context of knowing that I'm speaking about a programming language,
It's a
that might actually
language,
sound like a child that
a,
learns to speak a
a
language
language,
and
yeah,
write
a
and read a
language,
language.
yeah.
So for me, APL is a natural language.
Nice.
It's
Mm.
not something I learned. It's not like I'm speaking English now, but I learned English in school. Right? That's not
Right.
how I learned APL.
So,
Learned APL organically. And even though I don't
right.
speak APL because it's not really a spoken language, but that's no different than, say, Chinese. You can't
I'll bet you could, though. I'll bet you could if
you
tasked
can
to it. Sounds
you
like you
can you
could
can
speak in it.
spell. No, I can't, because you can spell APL, but you can't really speak
Yes.
APL unless you decide to give sounds to the letters. But
Right.
that's like Chinese. nobody can speak
Mm.
Chinese, or even if they could, it's just stilted, right? It's not a natural thing to do. You can write Chinese, you can read Chinese, you can translate Chinese to a spoken language.
Like
Just like when I
Mandarin's the spoken language and Chinese is the written
exactly.
language. Oh, okay.
Yes, but there are many spoken Chinese languages. They all share more or less the writing,
Cantonese,
but you have to
Szechuan.
translate the written language to a spoken
I
language. And
see.
there are people who cannot speak with each other, but they can write with each other.
Oh,
So
wow.
too, a German APLer, a Japanese APLer, an English APLer, they might not be able to speak with each other, but they can all write APL to each other. And I actually have an example of this as a kid. I don't how old was I at the time? And it must possibly early teens, maybe even a little bit before that. I found among my father's books uh, a book titled APL im Beispiel. It's German, APL through examples. And by then, I knew APL fairly well, but I didn't know any German. I still don't really know any German, but I was able to read the book kind of in reverse because I could read the APL code and then I could read the German description of what the APL code did, being that it was teaching by example, and I could figure
Mhm.
out what various words and phrases meant in German because of what the APL code was doing. Right, so I was using it the opposite way of what the book was intended to be.
Wow.
Mhm.
So you can see that I could have communicated with a German APLer in APL. We would only be able to communicate about data algorithms, not about daily life, obviously. There's no word
Mhm.
for teapot in APL, right? Um, but it's really a language for me. I don't when I write APL, when I read APL, I don't verbalize, and so people think maybe it's
It's
awkward.
natural. It's like you're thinking in it. Like
Right.
you're it's the way
It
your
goes
thoughts are.
straight from the thought to the
Right.
glyph, and I write the glyph down, and I touch type APL. I
Hmm.
don't go searching in the language bar for a symbol. So it's no
Sure.
more difficult for me to type an alpha than it is to type an A. Um, and so there's just like if I write human language. I mean, some people do speak out what they write, but many people don't speak out what they write. They just write directly from their thoughts to words.
Mhm.
So in that way, I'm an APLer, just
Yeah.
like I'm a Dane, you could say, that
Yeah.
speaks Danish.
Mhm.
Um, and the other programming languages I have always picked up from uh, books, examples, learned it. So and they are always like foreign languages to me, and it always feels stilted to try to express myself like that. And it will most often be me thinking in terms of how I would do it in APL, and then trying to express that in those languages that I will venture to call inferior languages because I can't express myself algorithmically. Okay, there's no easy way to express the things the way that they can be expressed in APL.
So it would be like Danish to you is
Yeah.
like that's the language that, and so when it comes to APL, that's, you think of it that way, as that's your native language in terms of programming, and then everything else is a foreign language.
Well, I just wanted to add that this applies to non-array programming languages. So, um, JavaScript is what I meet the most these days, but I have also dabbled earlier in things like Basic and even Pascal, I think. Um, But then there are other array languages. You mentioned J, BQN, and so on. So for them, I experience it more like what I do with languages that are similar to Danish. So I can also speak Swedish. I
Oh,
lived in Sweden for a while, went to university in Sweden. Danish and Swedish are very closely related. English doesn't really have a good um example for this, but you might know, for example, that Spanish and Portuguese are very close to each other, and in general, Portuguese speakers can understand a lot of Spanish, maybe less so the other way.
yeah, that's true,
Um,
actually. Yeah.
but even people living along the borders between, say, France and Italy can often understand each other. People living along the border between Germany and Netherlands can understand each other somewhat. And Danish and Swedish Norwegian are very closely related to each other. So while I can speak Swedish somewhat with an accent, and I can understand everything in Swedish, speaking and written at least in standard Swedish, and some dialects. Norwegian, I can't speak, but I can make myself understood by twisting my Danish somewhat, and I can understand everything that's written in one of the two Norwegian languages. And that's kind of how I experience things like PQN and J. And it's much the same thing, the same structure, same grammar, basically, with some small modifications. Um, the spelling is different, and and especially for BQN experience, like the spelling is different. I might not remember what these symbols do. For J, J has this ASCII spelling scheme where primitives are made up of some ASCII glyph followed by one or more colons or periods of some mixture of those. And there, it's really hard for me. I have to really sit and think about how symbols fit together to form one unit so that I can make sense of it. And once I got the idea what it is, then I can understand because it's the same structure as APL. It's just that transformation layer is hard for me, and that's how I have it. If I try to read Cyrillic or Greek, I can't actually understand the languages, but I know the alphabets. It's just very stilted to me, so I have to translate. So that shape, oh, I know that corresponds to this Latin letter, and then I can read it without knowing what it is I'm saying, but I can just read the letters.
It sounds like in this case, you really put the L in language in feeling that way and looking that way. So while we were playing with Legos and erector sets, what I grew up on, I mean, I started programming at 8, and actually APL was the first language I dove into. But you were really, those were your toys, really, it sounds like from extremely early age.
I mean, I did play with Lego too,
Oh, you did? Okay.
and would have been awesome if Lego had chosen APL as their programming language for automating the toys. But
What did they use?
uh,
Basic?
I don't even know.
Something
I
not great.
think so.
Well,
But
I have a
yeah, go ahead.
question. Going back to what you talked about first, learning, you grew up with APL. Um, it was my early experience too. My first language was APL as well. We were exposed to the IBM 5100. I guess you've heard of that machine. And that was one of the
I've
two
seen one.
languages offered. Pardon me?
I've seen one.
Screen about that
You've
big.
seen one.
Yeah.
My God, I
In a
haven't seen one
museum,
in so
right?
long. Yeah.
So,
No, no, I know. It was at the home of one of my father's friends. He had
yeah,
one
Wow,
large.
that's
the
amazing.
thing was like 30
Well,
grand when it came out.
but I think that for me, I had a different experience, and I wanted to ask you. I mean, you were steeped in APL. Your father was steeped in APL. It was very. I mean, so the reason I'm asking this way is because the reason I think that I switched off to BASIC and other languages besides APL, I did have one professional programming experience at the Aerospace Corporation writing in APL because that was one of the languages they offered. And it was the only one that would do what I needed it to do at the time. But didn't stay in that environment. And quite frankly, in my experience, I just have, I mean, until Christopher and I started talking about APL and talking about, gee, I'm looking at, array languages and looking at APL again. And I said, hey, write this program in APL. I had never seen a in APL at all. And I'm curious as to how that happened for you. Is it just that in Europe that there actually is a large or at least a larger market for APL? Because to my mind out here in the States, it just doesn't exist, or at least not in my experience.
Um, I don't, I don't know if Europe is especially much more. I think APL in Europe is slightly more local, slightly more seen, but because to actually like turnover made using APL, I'm not so sure. There are also a lot of APL using companies that are very quiet about it.
Ah,
APL
that's
took
good to
like
know.
a downturn during the 90s and early 2000s, and then started kind of on the way up again. And it was so bad that APL became like a bad word. It was not something you want to say that you're using because then people will say, "Ah, that's old-fashioned," or bad for whatever reason. People were all, it's got to be object-oriented, or maybe they're even into this functional thing, and the APL is just old-fashioned. And so you could even see that on old dialogue materials. They used to push that the language was called dialogue.
Right.
And then somewhere far away, hidden on some page, they will say that the dialog language is built upon an APL foundation or APL core or something like that, or it extends this old standard. But they would say the language is called dialog, and that's changed now. Now it's definitely APL. That's the recognizable thing, and it's not a bad thing anymore. It comes up on Hacker News all the time, and some people criticize it, but it's gotten some more respect. Um, but maybe for me personally, there was the value that it was just a toy. I didn't
Hmm.
care that it was not commercially viable. I can't get a job for this because I never considered it as such.
Not sure from our environment, or at least my environment, that was really an option for us because there just wasn't any demand for it.
Right. I
And
mean, there were some. A lot of companies have disappeared that were using APL. A lot of companies switched to something else. There are still plenty of companies that actually use APL. It might be ancient code that's just running. And my father wrote some code for an insurance company, I think it was, and it was done and it was bug free, I suppose, and it was just kept running, and they were expecting to be using it for decades more, but nothing more needs to be done, right? And APL always has this thing against it that let's say an IT department they switch to use APL, at least back then. Things may be different today. They can get things done faster with fewer programmers. Some people said 5 times, 10 times. And if you have a manager of the IT department and he has another 9 people with him, then he can fire maybe those 9 people and do everything himself. That lessens the communication cost as well. A lot of time and effort goes into communication. And no manager wants that. Right? You want as many people under you as possible. Then your salary goes up. If you're just one lone guy doing the thing, and then you're nobody.
That's a
Right?
good
And
observation.
yeah,
um and they and even the higher ups that don't understand how you could do such a thing. That doesn't seem right, right? Surely this IT manager doesn't know what he's doing, firing the
because
whole bunch.
because
Right?
he's firing all of them. Yeah, that's there's
Yeah.
always been that communication breakdown between technology and business.
So, but for those companies that kept using APL, they had a lot of in-house investment in code, in algorithms, and rewriting that, and is prohibitive. Right? They just can't do that, both because of they've already built up so much, but also because it's actually easier to express algorithms in APL
Yeah.
than in other languages,
Yeah, I was about to
and
say
so they
that.
will
Yeah.
keep using it.
The
I
They
was
expressive
might
reading.
not
power,
might
right?
yeah it might not be visible to the outside, but and I shouldn't. I'm not allowed to give away what our customers are. The Dialog website has some example case studies, and you can go look at. But from big energy companies to financial services being rendered to manufacturing, um, even to small service companies. There's a Danish company that provides food for students at school where they have a system running online. The parents can log in and order food for the children, and then it gets delivered, and it's running on an APL backend. But you might not see that. Right? There's nothing really giving away that it's running like this.
Yeah.
Um, there's a uh, there's a very large so if there's one very large uh, portfolio management company in Europe called SimCorp. Their core product is written in APL. It's not a secret, and they're doing very well. There used to be like two competing companies, one from Italy, one from Denmark, and they just swallowed up the European market from the north and from the south until they met in the middle, and then one bought the other. Sorry. So, um, and then you say, well, what would there been an option? Being that there are so few APLers needed, then there also needs to be a smaller pool, needs to be a smaller market, and that makes it harder to find one when you need it. You don't have as many on standby. You don't have them being churned out of schools all the time. And then companies, if they're big enough, will go and find their own solution. So SimCorp, I know, they have their own internal APL school.
Oh,
Ah,
They
wow.
don't they don't try to find APLers generally. They
They
will just find
teach their
people
own.
who are clever enough that maybe subject matter experts of what they need in economy, finance, whatever, and then they train in APL. And there are other companies as well that have outsourced training APL instead of trying to find APLers. And I've also at Dialog been hired to on behalf of some other company that's on behalf of another company to train a whole bunch of people in APL. And there is the problem that it's a very strange phenomenon. We're still not entirely clear what's going on, but it seems to be that computer science students, like people who have studied computer science, are generally speaking the worst suited for learning APL. You'd think
No
maybe there'd be the
surprise.
opposite.
No, it doesn't
Actually, I
surprise
But
have
me at
no
all.
trouble believing that
Yeah,
at all.
yeah.
okay. So we find that people who say that I'm just not cut out to be a programmer, and people who don't even know what programming is about, children, lay people, subject matter experts, scientists, mathematicians, they tend to pick up APL fine. Computer science people, they really struggle. They have, I mean, some are fine, some do fine, but I think they have to put in a whole lot more effort. Whether it's, I never studied computer science, so I don't know whether they
Right.
brainwash them in the schools, or they've gotten their minds into such patterns, the way of thinking of things, that they just can't conceptualize a multidimensional array. I don't know. And they seem to really have problems. And of course, that's an issue, right? When a company tries to hire, generally you hire computer science people, and it just doesn't work so well with APL. So there's a lot going against APL like that. And I don't know if it would have been an option for a lot of people to continue, but some people managed to. My father was never out of work. It was a matter of managing his time day and night with all the different consulting tasks. And yeah, then there were other APL consultants that had plenty of work to do.
Back when using the 5100, one of the things I always remember is having to do the backspace thing. I don't know if do you still have to do that where you write a character and then backspace over and put another character over it, and
Yeah,
that
no,
that major
it
symbol.
can be done, or at least some APL support it. Dialog APL actually does support it. If you try, and there's some fun tricks, you can even automate it. Like if you try to print out a character and then a backspace character and followed by another character, it will combine them if possible. Of course, in the old typewriter terminals, anything could be combined because you literally just print on top.
Well, that's
Right.
But
funny.
here it's restricted.
Yeah, that's funny
But
because
it's
you
more a quirk and an Easter egg than it's nobody uses it for real.
well,
Right.
you posted a video recently, an old black and white video of a professor in England demonstrating APL when I was first there, and it was on the teletype. And in order to get some
Right.
of the symbols, some of the glyphs, it was literally the teletype type head moving back and over typing on top of
Yeah.
the thing to produce it.
You
So it's funny how that
the number of glyphs that were available on the typing technology,
the little spinning type ball. Yeah,
typewriters and so on, it was very limited, right?
yeah,
Originally they would use a proper typewriter with like arms that would go up, and so you don't have much more than the uppercase, lowercase alphabet and the digits and
yeah.
a little bit of punctuation. And that's why they made the lowercase positions be uppercase letters, and the uppercase positions were APL symbols.
Yeah, I remember
And
that.
there's a little bit of punctuation, and so you have to really be imaginative. So, for example, for the exclamation point, the factorial, you write a quote, an apostrophe,
Right, that's
and
right.
then backspace
And
over
a
it, and
period.
put a period,
Yeah,
right? That makes a
makes an exclamation
um,
point. Yeah.
yeah, and so on. Uh, and that's how where it came from. I actually think that was a positive thing. Because of that, having to compose characters together like this, that forced APL to have a very harmonic looking character set, because you
Oh
have these
yeah.
basic shapes that were included. So certain characters didn't have meaning originally. The overbar, underbar, and to a certain degree, vertical style, the del and delta triangles, the quad, the rectangle, but all those are geometric shapes, and then you would overlay them on top of each other, and that gives APL this beauty to it. And it's actually formally even described how things are composed. So you start off with a quad, with a rectangle,
Hmm.
um, and that's supposed to have the golden ratio proportions.
Interesting.
And then you from that rectangle you construct all the other glyphs by bisecting parts and so on
Right.
until you can and drawing inlaid circles Um, and well, for me, that just helps that the APL looks nice, and things like BQN, in my opinion, looks less nice. It looks kind of alien, spidery, um, and J looks horrible. It's just ASCII noise
I'm gonna
for me.
agree with you on
Okay.
all three of those. I actually find the APL glyphs to be the most attractive, the most elegant. So I'm becoming very addicted. You're converting me over into it pretty quickly.
Yeah, so while we're not bound by that anymore, and
Yeah.
then it still has influence. And when we occasionally need to find a new glyph at Dialog, because as the only APL vendor that actually adds new glyphs, pretty much, it's a lot of work. It's not so
Yeah.
obvious. You just go grab some random emoji or something for it.
Yeah.
You
No.
really have to think. It has to fit in. It's like what would Ken have done? Right? Well, how can we take the existing character set and build up? We added the stencil operator. You probably haven't even seen this one, but the stencil operator, it's quad diamond. Um,
No, I haven't
so
seen that one.
it's basically like a cellular automaton operator.
Oh wow.
It's way overpowered in a way. So with this one you can express game of life. You might have seen the game of life video in APL, and it's
Yeah.
just a few characters. But with this, game of life becomes trivial. There's like nothing left
Two
because it
characters.
literally takes. Yeah, I could look it up. And game
Yeah,
of
I'm looking at it.
life.
Looking at it right now.
Yeah, we have it
Yeah.
in
So
one of
if
our
you have
channels.
a lookup table of game of life states, then you need like 6 APL glyphs, a couple of numbers, and the lookup table. If
That's
you
a,
want to compute everything, then let's see, then you need like 17 characters for the whole game of life, everything included. Um, and the same thing goes for like linear cellular automatons. You might have heard
Mhm.
like about Rule 110 and things like that. You can make Sierpinski triangles and so on. But for that, the idea was we want to find something that symbolizes a window, it's called stencil code, that moves over the paper, so to say, and looks at a little window at a time and applies something to it. And it took a lot of thinking until we chose this one, where the idea is that you have like the quad represents the whole array, and then you have this little diamond that represents like an overlaid stencil, like kids will draw a
yeah.
pen that follows this path. It's not simple to make that work.
And you're reusing symbols you already have. You have the quad and you have the diamond. Is it the same diamond
Yeah,
superimposed on the
it's the same
quad?
diamond.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a kind
Yeah.
of it's a very attractive symbol, I would say, in
Yeah.
terms of what
Yes.
you're
It
describing.
looks like a stencil, like
It
what the children
does.
will
It
use
does.
to draw
Hmm.
Yeah.
outlines. Right?
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
and we're adding very few, and we often add them by modifying existing symbols. So, for example, I had the so-called left shoe. It's like a
Yeah.
subset of that we've had for a long time, but we added that same symbol with an underbar
Yeah. I saw
to
that.
be like it's a variant of that, um, and that's a common theme.
I didn't like that
I had
BQN
a
made it square. I liked the curve in the shoe, and it became a
Yeah.
square thing. I was like, why did it do that?
well, this makes me think of one of the questions that I had, but I want to ask one other question first, just out of curiosity. Um, when your father was doing APL back in the old days, did he ever have to use punch card machines? I mean, did they ever have cards that had APL symbols on them? I mean, how did a program get fed into a computer before the days of actually typing into a terminal, or did he ever
Magnetic
experience
tape.
any of that?
So I don't actually know. Um, but no, I think APL was always interactive with a typewriter terminal
Okay.
of some sort.
I think so.
Well, I
Um,
was just curious about that.
he
My
did use punch cards, but I don't think when he was at IBM, I don't think he ever used punch cards for APL. I don't think anybody really stored APL as punch cards. It was already uh, advanced enough that the mainframe, that's called a
Mhm.
server in today's world,
Yeah.
and on a time sharing system, that's called the cloud in
Yeah. Yeah.
today's world, but
Exactly.
nothing has
Time
actually
sharing is the
changed.
cloud. What's old is new again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All it is.
Yeah.
And it would store people's workspaces for them. So you just log in and everything is available to you, and you can ask APL to type out on the paper what you've got there, and then type new things, and it just stores it again.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because being familiar with punch cards
You
and
are. I
understanding
don't go
how,
back that far.
well, I'm
I got
not saying I
magnetic
go
tape
back that
about
far
that
either,
big.
but I've heard of them and I've seen them. I was curious if there was ever a punch card that had APL symbols on them,
I
but
don't remember.
But punch cards didn't.
curious.
Punch card didn't really have symbols on them. There
No,
were
it's
some
the
punch cards where
alphabet.
It was the
they would
alphabet and the
print.
numbers,
Yeah.
Right,
and that was,
they
yeah,
would print on the edge of the punch card the human readable text
Right.
occasionally,
Right.
and there you could do that, but really they were just bits, right? And generally there were 7 bits on modern computers from the 360 onwards, 7 bits with an eighth check bit, which is how we get 7-bit ASCII,
Right.
eventually.
Exactly.
And there's nothing preventing APL like that. So the various APL vendors, remember this was decades before Unicode, they had to fit into their machine some way of storing APL. IBM pioneered the 8-bit byte with a System 360.
right.
And but even 7-bit is really enough. If you get rid of one alphabet, like a case, right, uppercase, lowercase, then you have 26 APL symbols right there, and then you could possibly store them with the overstrikes, so you could store them as multi-byte tokens, possibly. I don't even think it was necessary. And then certainly for an 8-bit byte, there's no issue at all. And various APL vendors came up with one or more schemes for storing APL, and that was specific to their system. Translation is a bit of a bother if you want to move from system to system. And even Dyalog had this. So we have something called Dyalog Classic that actually stores APL code using 8-bit bytes, and then it's just custom mapping when you need to communicate with the world outside. But the normal thing today is use Unicode. Um, so it could certainly have been stored on a punch card. There wouldn't have been any issue.
Watching your video, I thought to myself, our approach may be wholly inadequate to describing the capabilities of a language like APL because it's rooted in some very basic business data processing concepts, right? Take in some info from the user, print some output, do a loop, run through, do a consistent output to the screen, and then and then finish. When you were describing the structured language statements that you can do in APL, and my experience with APL being so much further back and thinking, when did this happen? They started putting structured, I don't remember any of this, in APL. And it occurred to me, this might have happened for a lot of reasons as we went through. I mean, they added object-oriented to Fortran. They added object-oriented to RPG. Well, there are RPG programmers out there, and they want to learn object-oriented, but they don't want to learn an object-oriented language, so we'll just add OO to RPG. And I was curious, do you have any insight as to whether or not that might be the same case with APL, where people were coming over from structured languages like C and BASIC and coming into APL and, gee, I just can't really get it. And somebody said, well, we'll add these statements to APL.
So I don't think historically not because of people coming to APL from other languages. I don't think that's why it came. Um, like you've experienced for yourself, where I think it's an appropriate example is by Hello World, where you do have some flow, and it's not just a simple loop. You have some special conditions where you go in. This is whether we started without an argument. So it's not. It took me some time even to figure out how to use these control structures in a sane way for that. But doing it with branch is really not fun. And there's no question about this kind of thing is needed. Sure, you can make all the beautiful mathematical algorithms for your text computations, but sometimes you just have a flow where you're interacting with the user, especially, and you have to jump around. And writing that with just a branch, which is what APL had for decades, is not fun. I learned it from my father as well, and I also learned patterns, and I learned to use even code that was strictly speaking unnecessary, so to stay sane. So my father would tell me to always write a for loop, even though it's actually easier to write an until loop. because with an until loop, you just have a label at the top, and then at the bottom, you do a one check whether you should go up to the top. And say if you do that one day, you'll get hurt by the condition being already fulfilled by the time you start, and now you go through the loop once. So you have to do some, do a check at the beginning, and then maybe branch to the after the whole structure, and then at the end you might need to do another check, or you could come back up. Um, and so people were writing this ugly APL that's not very APL-y, even though you can use the branch and you can use replicate to choose the line numbers you go to. Um, there was a need for it, and some people even wrote libraries where you could somehow either compile your APL in a way to branch APL from using some keywords. There was a project called APLGOL that took the control structures from ALGOL basically and put them into
Apple
APL.
goal.
Yeah. Um, and and then by the end of the 80s, it was pretty clear that people wanted to have this. So in the early 90s, it came into and mid 90s came into various APLs. Not all mainstream APL, but Dialog got it in 96, I think, actually as one of the last ones to adopt this. And they are kind of ugly, right? What people are used to seeing with constructor today is some keyword and then some curly braces,
Yeah.
and this is really clunky. This it's very algol like with a keyword at the beginning and the end something at the end for and end for. Um,
Very
and
boilerplate.
our
Yeah.
CTO Morten Kronberg, he says that's actually a good thing. He says it's not part of the language. It's more like a wrapper for the language. The language itself, APL, is this algorithmic thing, and then you can stick that into a structure that controls the flow, and it should stick out. It should look like a sore thumb, because that's not how you want to solve algorithmic problems. That's only how you want to solve
Control
flow
flow.
problems.
Yeah.
And actually, the clunkier they are, the more you notice what the overall structure is. So you
Gotcha.
can read APL at different levels. You can read it at the very much highest level, so to say, where you just see the flow where things are going, and then you can drill in and say what is the actual algorithm based on APL primitives, where you don't have to worry about how the algorithm is implemented. Just think about reverse as reverse and transpose as transpose and so on.
Okay.
And
Well,
for object-oriented things, you mentioned as well, Dialog and some other APLs have object orientation as well. It's generally frowned upon. People don't like it so much, but for certain things, it's definitely a good thing. And when Dialog added and other APLs as well, they added GUI objects. It's basically a wrapper on the WinForms on the Windows, and there you have state in the object itself. And you can do this in a functional way. I'm sure some of the pure functional programming languages do that, but it tends to be not very pleasant to use, if I understand right. And having the actual object system available for that is then a benefit.
well, Christopher, is he right? Is that can you do that actually in a real
Well,
functional way? Because this is an
we
argument
we have we
we
have
we
we have
go back
plenty of
and forth
other
on.
episodes where we'll dive into that and
Talk about
discuss that.
that.
This isn't the place for that. I want to get back to you, Adam. I want to ask you, since you were, I don't even want to use the word indoctrinated, but almost like you breathed and lived APL. I'm assuming that for you it was a hobby, it was fun as a kid, and then at some point you transitioned to it became a job, it became a profession. And so, two questions I want to ask is one, like, what was that like? And does that allow you to still enjoy it as an art, as a hobby, as something, or is it now a way that it's work, more work than anything else? And then what are you doing these days? I've heard your title at Dialog is the language designer. So are you the guy pushing the design of the language? And what's your work like?
Well, I will start by questioning the premise of what you're saying. Did I ever stop playing with APL? Sometimes it's my professional work is frustrating, but I keep reminding myself that I get to play with the APL for 8 hours a day and get paid for it too.
Okay.
Because it never really stopped being fun. APL is fun to use, it's pleasant to use, and I think more than express your algorithms succinctly or use funny symbols or so on, I think that should be a more of a selling point. programmers tend to be stressed people that eat potato chips and drink soda, right? And then they still get back pain even though they don't even move, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe because they don't move.
Yeah.
Um, and they're always frustrated, and you always they tend to rant and they tend to be upset at everything around them and nothing is working and so on. And of course there are bugs in APL programs as well, and even in the APL interpreter occasionally. But I think overall APL programmers, or maybe all array programmers, have more fun. They just enjoy what they do more. Um, there is less boilerplate or no boilerplate
Yeah.
depending on what you're doing. Right? I don't have to use many lines of meaningless nonsense just to write a hello world program. Right? Looking at you, Java. And right, but hello world in APL is too trivial. It's literally just quote hello world quote. Right? There's nothing to do.
That's what it should be.
Um,
Yeah. It's what it should be.
yeah. Um, so, but of course, some things are tedious in APL as well, and especially when it comes to things that you can't really APLify. GUI programming is never going to be fun, I think. Um, and it's rarely repetitive. It can be difficult to approach a new uh, code base and try to work on that. But And the amazing thing you have to remind yourself then is, okay, right, I'm approaching an old messy code base, and there might be several hundred or maybe even 1,000 lines of code, or a few thousand lines of code. And then you go look at how everybody else counts in millions of lines of code, and you go, yeah, okay, good thing I don't have to make my way through that kind of thing.
Now you know
The
why
largest,
we're all so grumpy. Now you see it. The
yeah.
rest of us.
And so, and we do have some large things as well. And we have a couple of objects, whatever, collections of code in that we ship with Dialog that have almost 2,000 lines of code.
Yeah, but to
So
your
that's
point,
like,
the difference is in magnitudes, right? It's in
yeah.
magnitudes when
But
you're talking
we
about.
tend to write very airy code, lots of white space. And I know of one customer that has like 90,000 functions in APL. But
90,000
they're probably
functions. Wow.
Yes, functions. Yeah, it's a huge system. But I mean, most of them are probably small or
Okay.
medium sized. So I don't think the fun ever really got out of it, and I have a very hard time distinguishing between when I'm playing with APL and when
Wow.
I'm working with APL.
That's
The only
nice.
distinction I guess I can make is I try to keep this list of objectives for the year that we decide in the company, and if I just did something that fits into those objectives, then I suppose I was working. Otherwise, I was just having fun. But it's easy to be inspired by something that I'm working with to then go and do something fun instead. And there are lots of fun projects that become real things, and okay, eventually. So that was the first thing, whether that fun of it, because I hope that answers
No, it's
answers the
great.
question.
Yeah,
Sure.
we're into this.
Then you ask what do I do? I do lots of stuff at Dialog. I actually don't do so much APL as I would maybe want to. It's more meta APL a lot. Like you said, head of language design. Uh, sure. It doesn't mean I decide what goes into the language. It means that I advocate internally for things I think should go into the language. And we're extremely conservative about adding things. It
That's
takes
nice. That's so nice.
years and
Though that's so
years. Right?
good.
For us, adding something to the language, that we have to be confident that it can stay like that forever. Right? We APL primitives are forever. We can't remove them again. We can't change them again. And other things around it are much less forever. These system functions with quad names, those they can be deprecated. They can slowly fade away. Nobody uses them anymore. We replace them with something else. Um, and then we have experimental features. We have got this I-beam symbol that's used with numeric operand to select some temporary system service that might be used to model future behavior to try it out, or it's used for some special thing that we don't really want to make into the main part of the language. So I do some of that. I do a lot of teaching people things. both professionally. I do talks at conferences and workshops. I monitor various chat rooms and media and answer people's questions. There's the APL Orchard, there's a Stack Exchange chat room, there's the APL Farm Discord server. There are the Dialog forums and Stack Exchange questions and Stack Overflow and code review. Um, I have people email me questions. I also work as an internal APL resource at Dialog. I mentioned that most of the people at Dialog are not APLers.
Right.
So when they have questions, obviously they need to know some APL if they're implementing APL or things around it. But often they will have some question, how do you do this? Or even, what does this APL code even do? Or what is it trying to do? Or can you fix this or write this in
Yeah.
a better way? So they will come to me for that. I write up various things. And I also work on APL code, but the APL code I tend to work on is not very APL-y either.
Really.
It's basically systems programming written in APL. So I deal with, I don't know if you've even seen those user commands, things that begin with a square bracket that don't even use APL syntax. It's my responsibility to take care of those, implementing, maintaining. Um, there's a tool called Link that I've been working on for years, and I've stepped back a little bit from that, but it's a system to get away from the old workspace binary blob and way to do APL and use text files, Unicode text files to store APL instead. Um, and making sure everything is tracked back and forth, so it really feels like you're working on the text files and various utilities like this. And very often, it's structured code. There's not much algorithm going on. It's just decision points and branches everywhere.
More like the sort of stuff we end up having to do. Well, I noticed
Right.
that you give a lot of you clearly have so much passion for this because I mean you help me out, and unless you're going to send me an invoice, you give me a lot of your own time and energy for free to answer questions and point people in the right direction and spend time making videos and stuff like that. So I got to imagine you enjoy it. You enjoy that part of it a lot. Um,
Yeah,
it's,
I love teaching APL. I
yeah.
love going from nothing. Somebody that, and I can see in the APL Orchard chat room when somebody comes into the room, and it's not just me. Anybody can see that. And so I'll often turn to somebody coming in and say, "Hey, are you interested in APL?" And sometimes people go like, "What? Well, what is APL?" I say, "Oh, it's a programming language, but it's like different. Can I show you?" Right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes they become like real good APLers years later, and I
Sounds
love
pretty
that part,
rewarding.
teaching
Uh,
people APL.
and does APL create a more disciplined engineer than non APL language or more structured language?
Um, it's hard to compare, right? You can't even compare programming languages objectively because how do you even find somebody who has an exact same level of familiarity with the language and so on? So does APL make people write better programs? You can certainly write bad code in APL, no
Okay.
question about it. Maybe it won't at first glance look so bad to the uninitiated, but I see our customers write strange things. To me, it's
Hmm.
strange. To them, it made perfect sense. I mean, it might make sense to me as well, but they can sometimes simplify. You can take a whole line of incantations they made and just it's just one or two symbols, just used in a way that people don't think of. Um, but I think there can be maybe well, there's one aspect of this, and that is that the APL glyphs don't necessarily have names. But they do for reference documentation purposes and so that we can speak with each other. Um, but they can also be given multiple different names in different contexts. And I think it's important that the glyph establishes itself in a human's mind doing something, a pattern, an action that doesn't have a name in their native language because it allows or it makes it natural to think out of the box. You might not be led to this kind of usage of a built-in a programming language if it has an English name that pushes you in the direction of doing something in particular. So
Interesting.
For example, you have reduce or fold. Um, and those names very much push you towards thinking of collapsing multiple values to a single value.
Yes.
But you could also use it to iterate,
Yep.
because as you go over and you the values in order and you have an accumulator, you don't even have to use the accumulator. You could just
Right.
take the new input and do some side effecty thing on each one of
So
them,
you're not
and
reducing.
you're not reducing at all,
Right.
right?
Right.
You might
More of
even
a
not be
mapping.
interested in the result at all.
Right.
And having English names, they can lead people to not notice that kind of thing, and maybe the programming language designers also don't notice it, and they will add some other built-in for the other purpose, and then that might be virtually identical, or they might end up having an unfortunate name because then they realize later that there was a more general form of it. And APL really tries to generalize all the operations. So an example that Connor Hextra, that is an expert C++ programmer, brings up occasionally is a C++ algorithm, I think they're called adjacent differences. So adjacent differences,
Really
obviously,
tough.
it takes the difference between adjacent elements in a vector, in a list, right? Except you can actually give it a parameter to do something else than difference. Say summation, in which case it's adjacent sum or adjacent multiplication or something. But they already gave the whole thing adjacent differences, really pushes you in the direction of thinking of it for only one purpose.
And if you read it that way, you're not
Um,
going to read it properly, right? Because it's going to say adjacent difference.
right.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the reading obviously is horrible, but it also pushes you in that kind of direction. We can also see it. You mentioned how APL where it comes from, but actually APL stems from linear algebra and basic
Yeah.
mathematics.
Matrix
And you
math
have
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, you have notation for the sum, a big sigma. You have notation for a product, a big pi. There even the logicians will have notation for uh, being all true or any true with a big and symbol, a big or symbol. The set logicians will have a big union, a big intersection, these kind of things.
Yeah.
Um, and they might not notice that these are all reductions. They're all exactly the same kind of operation,
Yeah.
Hmm.
and that kind of mind-blowing realization is blatantly obvious to an APL that uses one symbol for the reduction, and then adjacent to that puts the symbol of what it is they want to do. And then obviously you can put anything you want to do that you want to put in between the elements to reduce with, even your own custom function. Um, so I think from an outside kind of objective place, APL could make people into better programmers, but that doesn't mean that they, in the circle they're in and among APLs, is necessarily a good programmer.
It seemed to me that in APL, you're going to have to be more specific in your understanding of how to do things. And I think your response video for Bye Bye Hello World kind of lends itself to that. I mean, it became very clear that in looking without trying to denigrate you, Christopher, just that we just didn't have enough real knowledge of the language to be able
Oh yeah.
to
Total
do that in the
neophyte.
most effective way for APL. And you really adequately, well, superbly demonstrated that with your response video. And so that was really what my question was about, was whether or not it either through an unforgivingness or through an encouragement made better developers out of people that were learning APL.
So I think there are some places where people could maybe even inadvertently become better programmers. One way you can look at the APL is as a collection of libraries. And every symbol in APL is something that might take relatively large amounts of code in other programming languages.
Yeah.
Even sometimes a simple case of using an APL symbol maybe isn't so big, but then if you expand it to the full multidimensional arguments and special cases and special types and so on, then all of a sudden becomes really, really complicated. For just as an example, you use the each operator. Seems very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it corresponds to a map in some programming languages. But do you know you can use each with a dyadic function? So you map over two different arrays at the same time, and they can have any number of dimensions. So you can have a 5-dimensional array on the left side and a 5-dimensional array on the right side, and then you have a function in the middle within each, and it just maps over both of them along all dimensions. Sure, you can write this in any language. It'll be a lot of code.
It would be a lot of
So,
arguments to maybe multiple functions that are overloaded.
and
It'd be like a Python thing,
and
right?
you-
Where there's like 50 things with defaults and various settings, and like, how do I use this? Yeah.
nested for loops. So sure, you can write 5 nested for loops, but what if you don't know how many nested for loops you need? You need
Right.
a variable number of nested for loops. So what you could, but of course, as I mentioned, Dyalog and is implemented in C. So clearly there is a C program for every APL program.
Mhm.
But you can have somebody who does not have the capacity or knowledge or training to write optimized C code, actually running optimized C code because the developers at Dyalog already wrote it. So look at Dyalog as a C, what should you call it? Like I don't know if templating language is the right word. Like you have all these modules that are all written in C, and then you just put things together. You just put all the bricks together, and it's running all this optimized C code. And that means that relatively naive APL code can end up with a performance that matches or exceeds that of an expert C programmer. Um, because you've got all these algorithms that are implemented and have been fine-tuned over decades, right at your fingertips, and the naive APL might not even know. Just as an example of this, not to spend too much time on it, but APL traditionally uses packed bit booleans. So this means that 1 bit, when you have a Boolean array, is stored as 1 bit in the computer.
Right.
Um, and that's also kind of reflected in using zeros and ones for the bits instead of the words true and false.
Yeah.
The algorithms for packing data like that are relatively complicated. It means every time you need to address a single bit, you need to unpack the bytes because generally computers will not address anything but entire bytes or even amounts of bytes at once.
Mhm.
But all that is done for you in APL. I can index right into a Boolean array and change any 1 bit, and I don't have to worry about this whole unpacking and little endian, big endian. You can take your code and move it between big and little endian machines, and it will all just work. That's all been written. And the algorithms for, say, just doing a compress, where you have a Boolean mask and some data, and you're removing things corresponding to the 0, all that is all written for you. It's the most natural thing for an APLer to do, and it's really complicated for somebody else to do. Just imagine, in any of the languages you know, you've got a packed bit Boolean,
Yeah.
and you got some other data, and you want for every bit corresponding to, say, a byte or multiple byte thing in the other array, and you need to filter it out and complete. This is not trivial.
No.
And so, and there have been presentations as well showing how relatively naive APL code can outperform hand-coded C, even though of course that's impossible because APL is just C, right? So in that way, it can make you not a better programmer, but a programmer that writes code that runs better.
A more powerful programmer.
Okay.
Yeah, a more powerful programmer certainly.
Yeah, that's certainly certainly of its own level of value.
I wanted to bring one more example of this, how you can kind of inadvertently be a better programmer. APL very much encourages operating on entire arrays rather than single values at a time.
Hmm.
And in today's world, we've hit this limit, right? The computer's not really getting any faster, or only marginally from year to year. Sure,
Scaling
Intel will have nice
horizontally.
fleshy slides, and the computer got like 1 or 2% faster than last year, but they get wider, right?
Yeah.
They get
Wider.
wider and wider, more and more cores, more and more can be done at a time. And so we encourage people to use SIMD, right? Single instruction on multiple data, and it's hard to do that. People tend to hammer a single core, and then they've got the 23 other cores just sitting there doing nothing. And in that way, the computers are barely faster than they were in the early 90s.
Right.
And in the APL interpreter, you can have, and you do have in some APLs, optimizations. Because everything is prepared for you to work on large arrays, it's totally natural to implement that using these instructions in the processors that work on multiple data. And all that, just you don't even have to think about it. I write some algorithm and I apply it to the entire array, and inside the computer, it's actually doing all these advanced SIMD operations, but I don't think about it. It's just there. So again, inadvertently became a more powerful programmer, even though I don't really know. I don't need to know how it works. It just works.
It seems like it's possible that in the same way that the advent of the multi-core processor brought functional programming back out of kind of the where it was deeply buried, maybe what you're saying is also bringing array programming both in APL and other languages, and some of the ones that are designed for GPU, like I guess Futhark, right, is specifically targeted for multiplexing on GPUs and that sort of thing. Do you think that's maybe the case? Why we're seeing this rise?
You can think about things as all functions. You can think about things as all objects. But the reality is, it's all arrays all the
It's
way
all
down.
data, yeah.
Right? The computer is actually just dealing with arrays. The memory is just
That's all memory
one
is.
giant
Yeah, it's
array,
all one
and
giant
all the
array.
addressing of the memory is just arrays, and it's all rectangular. Right? It's all orthogonal.
Yeah.
You can map it in a way that has multiple dimensions, but it all has to be aligned. And so array languages are a very good fit for this. And yes, running APL or APL-like code on a GPU is definitely an option. You don't have to go to a specialized language for that. There's a library called Code Defense for
Yeah,
Dyalog that takes
Aaron's
a
work.
subset of Dyalog. Yeah, Aaron Sue's work takes a subset of Dyalog and compiles it to, I think, goes via C++ to run on GPUs. And the idea is just to say, well, this part of the code is what I want to run on the GPU, and it gives you a cover function for that part of the code, sets it up for you, and now you're running your stuff on the GPU. That's it. There's a huge overhead. That's how it is. You have to send the data over there, and you have to get the data back again. So it's best if you can send small data to the GPU, expand it over there to enormous stuff, and then crystallize it all down to the final result, which is like yes, buy or sell or whatever it is, right? And then you bring that back. But that certainly, somebody expressed that as I think it was like you're sympathetic to the hardware. The language
Yeah,
is a good fit for the actual machine.
yeah.
Right? And there's nobody can come and say that the object-oriented languages are a good fit for the computer, right?
No,
Because
no,
it just isn't.
Poor fit.
no, it really isn't. My last question was about the use of APL generally in the commercial world. Is it expanding or is it contracting or is it not really changing at all?
Um, it's very hard to know. APL using companies tend to be secretive about their use of APL.
Their secret weapon, right?
Uh,
That's the way they look at it.
yeah, no, it really is. I mean, we have customers that don't want us to speak about them because they're afraid that their competitors will find out that secret ingredient that gives them that competitive advantage, which I think is kind of funny, but sure. I mean, if they think that it's APL that does it, is it expecting or contracting? I know there are companies that use APL that for whatever reason are planning to migrate off APL. They're just working out how to move to some other language, and they've been working on figuring out how to move to a different language for decades, and they can't figure out how to do it. And I know there are organizations that um, want to get rid of the old code for whatever reason, but the customers like how it's been written in APL, and so they stick it like that. There are also companies that are doing well using APL and are expanding their market and are adding new functionality to their products. So on that side, it's going up. They're expanding into new markets. Their products are actually good. They're able to quickly add features. If new customers want the new features, APL is, I think, objectively speaking, faster to implement new features in than many other languages. Um, and so on that way, it's on the way up. My guess would be that the amount of money, even inflation adjusted, that is being earned through the use of APL is slowly on the rise. Um, I don't see a lot of new applications being written in APL. Most of the people that use APL are either hobbyists and people just meddling around with the with things, or they have established applications in APL that they are expanding. I do know that there are some established APL users that will write bespoke systems for customers based on their in-house code. And so you could say that is a type of new system being written. Um, I haven't heard about any like breakthrough application. Some one of those. What do they call these companies that go from nothing to a lot
Oh,
in a unicorn,
unicorns.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
A
The
unicorn.
killer app for the unicorn.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I think there is a chance of somebody finding some killer application for APL, and could just explode like that. We have more work to do as well as implementers of APL. Dialog's not the only one. There are others as well. A lot of people have just been content with what they had, and so interfaces to the modern world have been neglected. Things are awkward. GNU APL started off right away with shell scripting and all Unicode and so on, and that's good. But the core language hasn't really developed since ancient as APL, as you've seen. Dialog has done more about the language, but neglected very much interfacing to the modern world, formats and so on. And that has been in the last years since I came, has been changing a lot. We got system functions for JSON import and out, export, and we got a quad CSV for character separated values, quad XML, obvious what it does. We've got a built-in HTML renderer, which is like a wrapped Chromium embedded framework, so we can
Mhm.
render render the HTML that we generate on the fly right inside APL. Um, we can now store source code in text files, so we can use all the third-party source code management software and put things on GitHub and GitLab and so on. Whereas that wasn't really possible before. And there's still more to do. There's still quirks in how we interact with the world outside. Um, but I think we're getting pretty close now. I have this idea that Dialog version 20, which will probably be in a couple of years, there'll be like the 2.0 type thing. Like now we got all the issues sorted out. There'll still be work to do, but now it's a really solid foundation that you could realistically build a new application on that works well with the world outside. So
Something to look
we'll
forward to
see where it
seeing.
goes. Yeah.
So what's life for you when you're not thinking about APL?
Who says that there's such a time? I mean,
Is there not? Are you?
no, I mean I have I have a family as well, and as you can see in me as well, I'm an Orthodox Jew, and that means that I have one day, 26 hours or so every week, that's away from work. No computers, no phones, don't travel anywhere, um, and I think that's very healthy for me because otherwise this mixture of fun and work it would completely take over. It's hard enough for me to put away my work during the week.
Are you sitting inside a
So
Faraday cage when you do that 1 hour?
no, we just shut off everything and then just be with the family and eat good food and so on. And it's very much part of the life and who I am. And I can certainly dream APL.
You certainly seem to enjoy
There,
it, it's a pleasure to
yeah.
watch because to your point, a lot of us are very grumpy about the sort of work we do, whether it's even our hobbies or our work because of the grappling of technology. But you seem to, it comes across that you express a lot of joy in what you're doing, and people can find joy in their life in whatever way there is. That's a great win. So, I would
As long
say,
as I don't have to deal with the world outside, because the world outside is dirty data and bad interfaces and
yeah, it's
buggy implementations and so on. So.
Yeah, very familiar with all of that.
so. You have any other final thoughts you want to express? Any points of view or opinions, whether it's on the world of programming or anything else?
Well, I would say, um, don't be scared off from it. And maybe it's not very business oriented for me as like a representative for Dialog just to say this, but you don't have to use APL.
Right.
You do have to try APL
They even have they
because
have
it will.
that. They have tryapl.org.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tryapl.org.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing to install. No special keyboard needed. You don't need a special keyboard anyway. Um, because as we say, like APL the way it pushes you to think can inadvertently make you into a better programmer.
I notice I think
And
differently immediately when I'm working with it. I'm immediately thinking in a different way. And there's that phrase, right? A programming language that doesn't change the way you think isn't worth learning. And I immediately do it. You made that mention about the Dell. When I first saw the Dell and I didn't know the name of it, or I was like, I don't know the name. I didn't look up all the names, but it didn't matter. It was like, okay, I'm declaring a function. I'm defining a function. That's what I see. That's what I see happening. Does it matter if it's called this or called that? I know what it's doing. I know what its purpose is. You know,
so
yeah, immediately
I
thinking in
think
that way.
there are lessons you can learn, and you can express things differently in the programming language you use daily by having learned patterns, ways of thinking in APL. And it's not a dangerous thing at all. We had a presentation at an APL Seeds event. There's one coming up in less than a month now, about somebody working at some company that dealt with some relatively large amount of data, and they had some Boolean masks, and they were applying them, and they were rewriting their system, and it was fairly slow. And then he went off and tried implementing it in APL, and it was tremendously much faster than that compiled stuff that had a large group of people writing. Um, Eventually, I think they rewrote it in Go, but
Yeah.
they rewrote it with the lessons learned from the APL. And it was faster running it in Go than it was in APL. It's kind of natural. It's all optimized and compiled. But without the APL model for it, without having the
Yeah.
APL thinking, we wouldn't have been able to do this. And all of this came at no cost to them because we only, at Dialog, expect you to pay us once you start making money.
Oh,
And they never made money using the APL code, right? They just
it's
used
like
the APL code for figuring out how to write it and Go, and then they went off and did that.
that's
So we
like
don't make
Epic
money on
Games
it.
does the same thing for game developers. We won't bill you until you make money.
So that's if there's one thing you take away from following this is just try it. It's really easy to get started, and don't expect to finish. You never finish learning APL. I still learn new techniques here and there, even though I've been doing this all my life.
Oh,
But any little thing you
it's like
do and
chess,
everything
right?
you learn about,
Infinitely deep.
yeah,
Yeah.
anything you learn and Boolean techniques and array orientation and looking at the whole data instead of piecemeal, you can use that. And you can find alternative ways to abuse the features of your normal programming language that will make your code shorter and faster. And shorter has a value too. It's not just for fun. Because, as you say, thousands of lines away, there's something is being affected.
Mm-hmm.
And when you make a change, the more compact things are, the more you can see on the screen, um, the less risk there is of making a mistake. As soon as your code expands, so you have to start scrolling, the rate of errors, I'll venture to say, goes up tremendously.
Yeah,
So
that's
being
yeah.
able to compact things down, that really has a value itself.
I'm right there with you on that. Singing my songs right there. I totally agree. Well,
Not necessarily mine, but I hear the
well, what do you
concept.
think? Are you finding it more attractive than when we first started having this conversation? Hear
Well, it
anything you
is making
like?
me think about playing around with APL
Let's
again.
do it.
You know,
Let's do it. I like it.
I mean, I don't have any commercial demand, obviously, but it does make me more
Well,
curious about it. And that's what I was.
I'm thinking about putting something like it inside Proglang Base because we're going to be dealing with massive arrays of data as we present all the statistics on programming languages. And I'm immediately thinking
Yeah,
about all the array operations that are going to be happening with this. And I'm thinking, wow, should plug BQN or APL or something into that. Even though our
right.
platform is primarily Erlang, because if I think about doing anything that's a server side service that needs to be reliable, I'm thinking about the Beam as a platform. So I'd love to have APL or BQN or some array capability on the Beam, or maybe just
Didn't
delegate to
somebody? I
that.
thought somebody did and made some APL for the Beam.
There was something. I found a BQN for the Beam that was abandoned because they found it just didn't perform, and they went a different way. I thought I was looking for APL as well. Not sure I found something there. But
Palmetto.
Palmetto, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's being maintained, but yeah, but that's at least it says re-implementation of Dialog APL in Erlang, so there's that. But I'm sure you have ways to communicate back and forth.
Yeah, and it's
There's
definitely
foreign function interfaces.
it's large arrays of data. In fact, multidimensional. If you think about it, really, you got at least
Yeah.
a matrix because you're going to have rows and columns. But then within every cell, you're going to have an array of data going down. Like I'm looking at a lot of stuff being more like histograms. If you want to describe a category that a language is in, it's not one category or another. It's a little bit of each category depending on how we qualify it. So we could see this as this kind of data going in. So yeah, I'm immediately thinking about how we can apply these sorts of techniques to that.
Yeah. Well, when in listening to you talk, Adam, about your experience with APL, I kind of wish I'd had, because like I had the one commercial experience decades ago and never had any after that. And when I was telling Christopher earlier that I don't have any copies of that code. I don't have anything to look back on what I was doing then, put myself in that headspace. And I really wish I had, because now I'm much more curious about what APL can do, even though, and what Christopher's talking about, and we do have a plan that could use the powers that APL really provides a lot more effectively than in other languages.
Yeah.
So that would be something very interesting.
Yeah. Well, great.
Well, that's all I've got. Do you have anything else, Christopher? Adam, is there anything else you want to share with us?
I mean, you know how to get a hold of me, and it's
Yeah.
not just the two of you. I mean, I'm always happy to demonstrate and teach and so on. So you can leave links around to various places I can be contacted at. I'm always up for offering people a one-on-one introduction to APL, and I tend to customize it to people. I ask them what's their background, what are they familiar with, how is math, and then you try it, and I think it could be valuable for people. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you for participating with us, and thank you so much for the response video you gave us to our proglangcast and our Bye Bye Hello World. It's certainly given me some thoughts about how we might want to proceed. Like, if we can find other more experts in a language to get them to respond to some of the stuff that we're doing, I think it would be really, really helpful.
I think we're going to be talking about array languages a lot more because, my particular thing is our goal is not to cover the mainstream. Everyone else covers the mainstream. So we're going to be talking about a lot of these things in these other parts of the computing world that just aren't visible to everyone else. It almost seems like the APL world and the array world was kind of on a different path from the sort of mainstream commerce-oriented, marketing, product, selling-oriented sort of stuff, where all the mainstream languages and the mainstream software development lives and where we've had to make a lot of our money over the years. So we don't need to cover that stuff so much. We'll touch on it because we're going to touch on all languages, but we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about Java and C# and JavaScript when we want to talk about these more interesting things.
You might want a different problem that comes more from the array side, and where you just have to write a function to do something and don't worry so much about input output. And some heavy data processing there, and then see how do the various languages do with that, and use the right tool for the job. I'm not saying you should only use APL, but certainly for some things, I think it's the right answer.
We're thinking of Bye Bye Hello World. We might do a Bye Bye Hello Web. Maybe it's like the tier 2, and then we do something that's more data-oriented, algorithmic, something that involves multidimensional information or complex, logical or mathematical processing, definitely as a use case. Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that input to us. It's certainly changing my thinking on how we might proceed with this in some cases.
Yeah. Okay, Adám.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you again.
It's a pleasure to meet you, and hope to see you again.
A real interaction other than the reaction back and forth videos, which maybe those will continue, but those are fun anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks again.
See you later.
All right.
Take care.